Welcome to What the Plus, a critical overview of the last century of family entertainment as filtered through the lens of Disney+. I'm Garrett Martin, a writer and editor, a fan of many things, and your host for the next hour or so. Thanks for listening. This week, we have a story of drugs and dinosaurs shared by one of today's top cartoonists. And like all good stories, it starts with a bit of history. After his first animation studio in Kansas City failed in 1923, Walt Disney moved to California and, along with his brother Roy, started what would become the Walt Disney Company. Their first studio at 2701 Hyperion Avenue, it wasn't nestled in the bustling film community of Hollywood, but sat just a few miles to the east, near Silver Lake. If you drove southeast from Hyperion for about 6 miles, you'd pass a house at 718 New High Street in a now vanished part of Los Angeles known as Sonoratown. Sonoratown was a gold rush settlement populated by Mexican immigrants starting in the mid-1800s. By the turn of the century, it was gradually fading away and was eventually absorbed in the 1930s when Chinatown relocated from its original location due to the construction of Union Station. And something that should come as absolutely no surprise to anybody who studied American history, both the Mexican settlement at Sonoratown and the original Chinatown suffered from the kind of economic and political disadvantages that result from systemic racism. Both areas developed a reputation for crime and illicit behavior, and both were in disrepair by the mid-1910s. It was during that decade, on September 9th, 1914, just 9 years and 5 weeks before Walt and Roy Disney founded their studio, that Los Angeles authorities performed the first recorded marijuana bust in American history at that house at 718 New High Street in Sonoratown. The Los Angeles Times reported on the bust the next day in an article headlined, "Wagon Load of Dreams Seized." The subhead blared, "New toxic fumes that give smokers pleasant sensations and hallucinations, but sometimes lead to murder, are wasted on unsympathetic air of police storeroom." The article notes that $500 worth of, quote, Indian hemp was seized into, quote, dream gardens by Inspector Jones of California's State Board of Pharmacy and detectives Leon and Rico. The state legislature had just added hemp to its poison list earlier that year. The Times doesn't miss the opportunity to mention their relationship to the word assassin while talking about how smoking the plant can sometimes lead to violence and murder. It credits a local murder in Sonoratown to a user of the drug. The article also claims that marijuana was very common within the, quote, local Mexican colony, along with violence. One cigarette of the stuff generally puts one in a dreamy state of beatitude, but sometimes it also induces hallucinations, Inspector Jones is quoted as saying. The smoke generally loses the sense of time. While the drug may be bad for the head, it is good for the feet. This was over 100 years ago, and yet you'll find the same stereotypes about cannabis users that have defined the war on drugs of the last 30 years. You'll also see the same blatant racism. All you'd have to do to run this article in many newspapers today is to just update the language and the phrasing. Almost 80 years after that drug raid on New High Street, Walt Disney Television and Jim Henson Productions launched a show called Dinosaurs on ABC. Yes, this is another episode about dinosaurs. I'm surprised, too. Dinosaurs was a weird show. It was a traditional sitcom about a family of dinosaurs who lived 60 million years ago in a society very similar to our own. The Sinclair family was played by animatronic figures, each one controlled by a small team of Henson performers. It was a hit when it came out in 1991, less than a year and a half after The Simpsons premiered. The success of Fox's cartoon is a big reason that this discarded Jim Henson idea from a few years earlier finally went into production after his death. As a Henson show, Dinosaurs has a satirical heart and a small bit of subversion to it, but it's still squarely a family sitcom meant for all ages. For a while, it aired as part of ABC's TGIF lineup, In other words, it was definitely a kid's show. And that's what makes the 1992 episode, A New Leaf, so weird. The 17th episode of Dinosaurs' second season takes a form familiar to anybody who watched sitcoms in the 80s or 90s. It's a very special episode with a heavy-handed message about drugs. In this case, the drug is a, quote, happy plant that makes the dinosaurs so happy that they forget all the responsibilities and the most basic necessities of life. This TV show, written and produced in the early 1990s, employs some of the exact same stereotypes about marijuana usage as that LA Times article from 1914. The most common arguments against cannabis, the ones familiar from the War on Drugs and all those very special episodes, are rooted in a century of racist propaganda. That's what today's guest, Eisner Award-winning and New York Times best-selling cartoonist Brian Box Brown, wanted to talk about when I invited him onto my show. Brown detailed the sordid, corrupt history of the anti-cannabis movement in his 2019 graphic novel, Cannabis, the Illegalization of Weed in America, and he reports on the current legalization effort in his online comic strip, Legalization Nation. Hopefully you've read his earlier books about Andre the Giant, Andy Kaufman, and the tangled history of Tetris, or his most recent work, 2020's Child Star, a fictionalized account of the life of a sitcom child actor from the 80s and 90s. So yeah, he's an expert on the war on drugs and old sitcoms, making this Dinosaurs episode a perfect choice. So join us while we talk about Brown's cartooning career, the roots of the war on cannabis, and this weird early 90s kids sitcom about drugs that also tries to criticize sitcoms that do very special episodes about drugs. Here on What the Plus. All right, my guest this week is Brian Box Brown, a fantastic comic artist, known for nonfiction graphic novels about Andre the Giant, Andy Kaufman, Tetris. His most recent book is Child Star, a fictional account of an 80s TV sitcom star. How's it going, Brian?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. I'm obviously been a fan of yours for years, and it's cool to talk to you about, a show about a subject close to your heart. Before we get to that, though, so you've carved out a pretty unique niche in comics with your series of nonfiction biographies and histories. As a creator, what appeals to you about nonfiction?
I don't know. I think it's just like something that I'm interested in general. Like, I've been a huge fan of documentary film for a really long time. And I think, that's kind of where I started, thinking about making comics as nonfiction. It's also kind of, when I started in comics, I was making autobiographical comics, which are also nonfiction.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it stems from that and just love of documentary film. And I just always think there's something great about a real story that's stranger than fiction.
Yeah. Are there any like specific documentarians that you're a huge fan of or that you feel like are influenced on your work?
So I love Errol Morris. His recent stuff I've been less interested in.
Yeah.
I feel like. But he did this great television series called First Person, where he just kind of like, it's 10 episodes, and he interviews kind of like a fairly like regular person that kind of has done something extraordinary, and gets them to tell their story and, makes it into a little film. And it's really great. I really love it. But I watch like every documentary that comes out, like tons of nature stuff, all kinds of music documentaries, whatever, all kinds of weird stuff, tons of weird YouTube documentaries and first-person accounts on YouTube. Like, I kind of love delving into a subculture on like Reddit and YouTube, especially because it's like a lot of people talking directly to the camera.
Yeah.
You get like this very interesting look into weird stuff. Like I got really into this over the last year. This evangelical Christian who believes that Donald Trump is the biblical antichrist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I got kind of out of it now, but for those 4 years while Trump was in office, it kept me entertained for sure.
Does that make them support him because they want to bring about the rapture and the end of the world? Okay.
That would be less interesting to me. The thing that was awesome about this dude, his name's Brother James Key, is that he was like so believed like it was awful. Like he just was like, no, this is exactly the book of Revelations here. Like, and he would point out like every week there'd be like news, and he'd be like, this is in the Bible, blah blah blah. And he'd like mention all these Bible passages. You know, for a minute I was like full on believing, like buying it. Like these arguments were really compelling. Yeah. And the guy was really interesting. So anyway, but so yeah, I love documentary film and like real people.
Cool. So you mentioned how your earlier works in comics and some of what you still produce as well is very autobiographical. That was obviously a very significant trend in underground and independent comics. Do you remember like the first book of that style you read that sort of like clued you in to that this was a thing people could do with comics?
So the first time I came across this was in James Kachalka's American Elf. And what he would do is like a daily like 4-panel comic strip about something that happened to him that day. And that was like kind of how I got into comics. Yeah, well, when I was a kid, obviously I read a lot of Marvel comics and everything, and then tried to get back into it as an adult and was like not really finding what I was found interesting as a kid. And I had stumbled across James Kachalka's American Elf, and that's when I was like, oh, there's other comics besides superhero comics. And it was, you know, it was the first time I was like, oh, you can just make a comic about any, like, a regular thing, like anything. It doesn't have to be a genre. Like, it could be any genre. You know, it kind of like helped me to kind of fall in love with comics and like understand the magic of what makes them great. And then, you know, when I was doing it, I think to do like these extremely personal, introspective, autobiographical comics is like really hard and difficult. I was like, you know, it's hard for me, and I didn't love it either. But I liked the idea of doing like real things, and I think that was kind of how I got into doing like just nonfiction, like telling stories that are not about me. It's easier. It's easier to talk about someone else's accomplishments than to talk about like your own. You know?
Right. And they're already like if you're already thinking about making a work about them, then they're obviously noteworthy. You know, their accomplishments actually, you know, mean something to people other than themselves. Whereas when it's your own life, you're like, wait, will anyone?
Yeah, does anyone care? Who knows? But that was definitely like when I was thinking about making the Andre the Giant documentary, comic. So I was watching a lot of pro wrestling shoot interviews, which are amazing documents. They're you know, these are people, you know, they're wrestlers, so there's, you know, a lot of working going on. But, you know, for the most part, the whole point of the shoot interview is to try to be like as honest as possible. And I think that's what makes a lot of work great. So like those pro wrestling shoot interviews that started to come about in like the late 90s and early 2000s, I think are amazing documents and great storytelling, and all the more great for their lack of cinematography of any kind.
Yeah. When it's just 4 hours of Greg the Hammer Valentine sitting on a couch somewhere, just telling stories that he barely remembers or whatever.
Yes.
Very entertaining. Yeah.
Yes. I have a 12-hour Ric Flair one on DVD.
And he's like almost Stan Lee level of just like completely full of bullshit about everything he says.
Oh my God.
So like those 12 hours, like how much of that, like, can you put any faith into?
I don't know. There's some guys that are in those situations are more truthful than others. Like some guys in those interviews don't really have as much skin in the game anymore. So it's not like, you know what I mean? They don't have to build up. Like Ric Flair like still has to have like whenever they shot that, which was like 2002 or something. Ric Flair still had a lot of skin in the game of pro wrestling. He's still working now, you know. And Hulk Hogan too. It's the same thing. But some of them are super great, and even that Ric Flair one is really good and funny, and just like
I mean,
he has a black eye in
I mean, Flair cannot not be entertaining. Like anything he does is just inherently fun to watch. That's something, you know, I interviewed the two guys who do Dark Side of the Ring recently, and that was a big part of the conversation, is how so many of these guys, as you said, have skin in the game. They don't want to anger WWE. They don't want to fall out of good graces with the monopoly in their business. So like it's really hard for them to book people or to get people to be really honest about things. And that's something that you see with shoot interviews, even where like they'd sometimes pull their punches when it comes to stuff involving, you know, the McMahons.
Mm-hmm. But that's why the best ones are the guys that didn't care at all. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the Billy Jack Haynes shoot interview. Oh. That dude didn't care at all, and really had an axe to grind, and just like, now, and that's one where I'm not even sure I totally believe everything the guy's saying, but he really did not care. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah. That interview was amazing because he did not care at all. He was just talking trash straight to Vince McMahon.
That almost became his brand, I think. Like people would book him for things just because they knew he would be the crazy conspiracy theorist about WWF and going further out there than anyone else in the business ever would about them.
You know, it's really like this new thing that's on now, the how it's like Dark Side of the Ring, and then there's the A&E show.
Yeah.
It's like tied together with WWE. So they occasionally get some footage that's interesting on that show. But the people they have talking are almost never wrestlers or people that were like, it matters what they say. You know what I'm saying? Like they're all commentators about wrestling, so they have like an opinion about it. But like, a lot of them I guess also are employed by WWE. So it's like, there's really WWE.
You're never going to get an honest history about wrestling if it's something that WWE is involved in.
You have. That's why like Dave Meltzer's role is like so important, and people because there's an alternate history. I mean, like it's you know, they're in control of the history book. It's like almost like, you know, WWE is the textbook you read in high school, and Dave Meltzer is Howard Zinn.
Right. Man, so when are you going to do your Vince McMahon book? I mean, I feel like you're someone who could cut through all the bullshit.
No, I don't know. I would be nervous, man. I mean, you know, as long as the stuff's true, you wouldn't really have anything to fear. But you know, Vince would not be above a lawsuit for show.
Right.
You know, although that would probably help your book sell. I have heard about an author that I know that is working on a Vince McMahon book and is not going to pull any punches, and it looks like it's probably going to be pretty good.
Yeah, cool. So, you know, speaking of wrestling so much, you're super prolific. Your books, like we've said, they hit on a lot of interests that, you and I both share: wrestling, games, comedy. How do you know when a subject is substantial enough to merit the book-length treatment?
Usually it's when I start telling my wife and my friends the same stories about it over and over again. Is when if I like keep harping on it and I realize that I'm like telling the same story to people, to all different people, and can't stop talking about it, then I start to think that then this is a subject that is something that could be a good comic book, like a book-length thing.
Yeah.
But only if I start repeating myself. If I don't repeat the stuff, it just goes away. But if I repeat it over and over, I like actually, it's actually part of the process of writing for me, is like telling somebody else the concept of the story in just like an oral sense. It's like talking about it and kind of seeing how, I kind of do this subconsciously, but like seeing how they're following the story, where the highlights and lowlights of the story are, you know, if there's a good place to end the story. It's like a micro version, like a conversation almost, is like about one of these stories is almost like a micro version of how like the general population might react to a comic about that.
Yeah. Do they get paid for their role as your like early sounding posts
my wife
or whatever?
My wife kind of does, because but the other people I don't really pay them. They don't even realize that they're working.
So your last book, Child Star, after all those nonfiction books, you went with the fictionalization route with Child Star, about an 80s child sitcom actor. I was going to ask why, but I'm wondering, you mentioned earlier you're worried about a lawsuit if you wrote about Vince McMahon. Were there legal reasons for maybe making Child Star about a fictional character?
No, not legal issues, but it was hard for me to like whittle. I wanted to do a book about a child star from the 80s because I was watching so many 80s sitcoms at the time, and I really couldn't whittle it down to like one person. There were so many good stories, and these types of stories were so prevalent across all of these child actors that were put in these positions of great popularity, that I don't know, I couldn't like choose one. I wanted to mush them all together, and at the same time I wanted to like delve into like what might be the psychology of this type of person without making judgments on like an actual person.
So what did you learn? Like what sort of trends psychologically do you see going through the ranks of the 80s child stars?
So it's not just 80s. I mean, like, it's actually funny. Right as Child Star came out, a documentary about child actors came out on HBO, like within the same week. Alex Winter directed it, and it goes through like, and this is like, it was like the documentary version of Child Star, but real, real with all real child actors telling their stories.
Right.
And it's a lot of the same things. It's like there's a lot of, when you're a celebrity in general, and even an adult celebrity, people come out of the woodwork, because now you're rich and famous. Like, even if say you're just like some chump on the street and you win the lottery, you're not really famous, but people know you're rich, and people come out of the woodwork to kind of scam you, and it's hard to tell who's got your best interests in mind, or who's just trying to get money from you or get some clout from you. And that's just like an average person. Now you're talking
Right.
about, you're not just rich, you're also so famous. Because these, in the 80s, if you were like in a sitcom that was a hit sitcom, you had like 30, well, in the best times, but like millions and millions of people watching you every week. Like like now, so when you see a huge celebrity, it, it's weird because like if you're on a TV show, you're not necessarily a huge celebrity because the eyes and everybody's attention span is so divided now. But back
Yeah.
then, everyone watched primetime television. Like, it was wild. So Punky Brewster was a huge star. And like they don't even make, I mean, I guess they do kind of make TV shows like that, but it's hard to picture a show that was that geared towards children that aired at prime time on a major network, and it was supposed to also be for adults to watch.
Yeah.
It's a very
It's also
strange.
fragmented now, like those shows
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
exist, but it's on channels that, if you don't have a kid and you're an adult, you're never going to see it. So,
Exactly. It's like Disney Channel stuff almost, but there's no Disney Channel, and it's on, regular TV. And if you don't have cable, it's on one of like 3 or 4 channels. So these people were like huge, 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 huge stars, celebrities, and they ended up being utilized as actual props for national politicians. The Reagan administration utilized, different strokes and Punky Brewster to do their Just Say No campaign and all that. It's just wild. And you're a little kid. And so now, and I read, if you ever read Killing Willis, I believe it's called, Todd Bridges' book, it's so tragic. I mean, like there was, he was abused by his manager. He was given all kinds of drugs and access to all kinds of things that he shouldn't have. And it's just like a mess. And it might be better now. It might not be, but it was a wild time for those kids. And I don't know. I also wanted to, when I was making Child Star, really wanted to write sitcom dialogue, especially 80s sitcom dialogue, because it was like I was trying to make it cheesy and almost like bad. And in that kind of environment, it's actually so fun because you're like trying to be bad. It reminded me of like Bobby Heenan, right? Like
right.
Bobby Heenan his character is supposed to be a buffoon. So if he screws something up, it's fine because he's supposed to be an idiot. Like if he falls down, great.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
it's
kind of like what it felt like.
so before Child Star, your previous book was Cannabis, the Illegalization of Weed in America, a look at the history of anti-marijuana propaganda, how it's inherently connected to racism. I kind of assumed that would be your work that is most relevant to what we're talking about on this show today, which is the weed episode of Dinosaurs. But after talking to you about Child Star, obviously, these things all kind of intersect. Like your various interests are colliding when it comes to us talking about this 30-year-old weird meta parody of very special episodes. Before we get into Dinosaurs, though, real quick about cannabis. I don't know, what did you learn when you were working on that book? Like what was the most shocking thing about the history of weed in America that you came across?
I think when I first started, naively, I think at some point I believed that they made cannabis illegal because in the 1930s, they thought that cannabis was actually harmful, and that's why they made it illegal. But that's not the truth at all. Not even close. It was just like 100% racism / one guy's careerism. slash media, manipulation. And because of that, we are dealing with such a mess for the last 80 plus years. And so that book just kind of focuses on how things became illegal and how we got to that point. But I'm working on something new now called Legalization Nation that currently just like a webcomic that's about cannabis legalization as it's going today. And believe it or not, you see all of the same stuff from 1937 going on today, even in places where they're legalizing weed. They use the same stigma that was created in the 1930s and completely based on false, anti-science, racist beliefs. And they use those arguments so that huge corporations are the only ones allowed to grow cannabis in the state. So it's a real, and I don't know if anybody's paying attention to that, to like the stuff going on now, because I think people just generally see cannabis legalization as a good thing. And, the majority of people just want it to be legal. But they don't quite understand what that means and how that's playing out. And it's playing out in a completely corrupt and inequitable way across the United States, mostly due to infusions of enormous amounts of money and political influence. And so I'm a cannabis patient in Pennsylvania, and I was just feeling so frustrated with watching this whole thing go down. And I would tweet about it, but I couldn't really get people to understand what it was about. So I had to make it into a comic. And I had to make it a web comic because things are moving so rapidly that, and the way publishing works, like by the time I would have written a book about this time period, and by the time that came out, it would all be outdated information. So I've been just making this comic and putting it up on my Instagram and my Twitter. And I've been in talks with a bunch of different outlets trying to get it out there in like a more substantial way. Stuff fall through and a lot of weird stuff going on. But it makes me so happy to do it that I feel like it's actually making a difference. Like because of the comic strip, I have representatives in the Pennsylvania State House answering my direct messages. and the other day, a law is still currently going through Pennsylvania State House that is a corporate handout that is going to allow Pennsylvania medical cannabis companies to include a certain percentage of mold in their products. And I DM'd my representative, and the next day he created an amendment that would strip that from the bill. And it was voted down 136 to 65. So,
man.
For a minute, I felt really good about it, but I do feel that the comic is helping. So that's why I'm doing it. So I would appreciate any support and stuff there. So it's called Legalization Nation.
And you can find that at your Instagram account, you said?
Yeah, on my Instagram account and on my Twitter, and there's a Patreon for it. That's all we got right now. There's a couple pitches out there, so it might end up somewhere else, though. But for now, that's it.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not that clued into the legalization efforts right now. Like I knew there was the issue of generally white-owned companies making lots of money once it becomes legalized, while black people who are thrown in jail for selling far smaller amounts of drugs are still in there, and how that's obviously a terrible racist problem. I did not realize, though, that the story was as American as it could be, with corruption and corporations and politics completely ruining everything for everybody. So that sounds fascinating.
There's a good, I mean, I think people know who Matt Gaetz is. If you look at his corruption background, it goes directly to, he's directly tied to an enormous cannabis corporation that just bought all these licenses across the country and have a foothold now in like 12, 13 states or something like that. And it's all because one dude, like Matt Gaetz and his other friend, got a license for his friend's brother. And now they have a foothold in 13 states. So, so basically, like, it's just like everything else. They're saving. My wife calls it trickle-down legalization. So first it goes to all the most, not even all, 6 to 10 of the most wealthy, connected, whatever, scam artists / corporations in a state. They're the ones that first get the licenses. And in a medical state like Pennsylvania, they're still arresting 20,000 people a year.
Oh, wow.
Majority black and brown people. While Trulieve, whose owner's brother is a representative in Florida, and that's how he got his license. While they are making, millions of dollars in Pennsylvania, it's just like the whole thing that I can't put it down. So I make comics about it, and it makes me feel like I'm helping in some way.
Yeah, I mean, raising awareness about this, and like you said, you have a direct pipeline now to your state legislature. So, man, it would be fantastic if you could, get something like that within Congress too.
Yeah. I mean, the national, I don't know, the whole federal thing too. Oh, it's a whole mess.
Yeah. Well, so marijuana, 80s, 90s sitcoms, the show you picked out to watch, it wraps all that together. It is the TV show Dinosaurs. This is actually the second episode I've done about dinosaurs, which is something I never would have predicted when I started this show. And the episode, it's season 2, episode 17, A New Leaf. It is a fairly well-known episode of Dinosaurs. Not quite as much so as the series finale where they all die. But so this is the episode. Yeah, totally. Worth watching. This is, I don't know, this is trying to have it both ways. It's both one of those annoying, like, very special anti-drug episodes while also trying to seem smart and cool by making fun of anti-drug special episodes. So obviously I think this is going to be a pretty obvious answer from you, but it's the first question I ask everyone on the show. What made you want to talk about this one?
Oh, well, I wanted to mention, I mean, I really do like the show Dinosaurs, and it was popular when I was a kid, and so I have like nostalgia for it. Yeah. When I watch it now, I think that it was actually cool and like well done. It was like these, it was visually interesting, and some episodes are really funny and actually have, the 90s, there was a lot of people with some weird political takes. Like, I watch a lot of 90s TV. I watch 90210 a lot, Beverly Hills 90210 a lot. And they talk a lot about social issues, and there's a lot of weird takes, strange takes. They're like, I don't know, just really, there's a lot of people following, like, the general idea about what the common knowledge or whatever. So anyway, this show, I mean, like for instance, what you said, like the episode where they all died because of climate change, that was like an interesting take on a political subject at the time, kind of like ahead of its time in a way. And the cannabis episode is so far behind the time. I mean, it's a total. There's so many horrible stereotypes in the episode. The general message is basically, I mean, they never say that it's cannabis. They just kind of make it be like drugs in
Yeah.
general. But it's
There is a seeds and stems joke though, which is very clearly a pot reference.
I mean, and
That's
it's
like the
also a
closest it
plant.
gets.
They call it the happy plant, But they do weird stuff when they're high. Like there's a scene where Earl like gets high and does this like dance. It was like a ballroom dance.
He becomes a cheerleader or something. It's weird.
Yeah, it's so strange. But there's so many stereotypes in it too. Like they immediately like can't function at all at work. Earl apparently is like gets high the night before and is still so high the next day at work that he just like can't even work or anything. And then they do try at the end to kind of be like psych, like this is like what we would have done.
Yeah.
Or like they were like we had to do this. The network made us do it. We're actually cool. And it was just horrible. I mean, like it was really the messaging was horrendously bad.
It's like they realized, oh hey, we're Henson. We need to have some of that kind of like Henson-esque like subversion that's not that obvious and not that dangerous. And so we're just going to go ahead and make fun of the thing that we have just spent the last 20 minutes doing.
Yeah. And I've been thinking so much about cannabis stereotypes in the last like few weeks, and I think about like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and like Jeff Spicoli, and like I love Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I love Jeff Spicoli. I love when he comes into the classroom with a bagel in his belt and like down his pants kind of, and I think it's funny, and like Cheech and Chong, same thing, but all of these characters, and they became archetypes for stoner quote unquote characters, are built on racist tropes that came about in the 1930s, that people that smoke cannabis are lazy. Mexicans that smoke cannabis, look at them, they're lazy Mexicans smoking weed all the time. So when I see this stuff, it's even like where they're trying to be like cool. Like there's a scene in this episode where the boss, like the Triceratops boss, Earl's boss, that's like a mean guy. He like smokes weed and then he's like chill and he's like cool and he's like listening to Hendrix and stuff. Even that type of depiction is like bad. So I think about the way they depict like alcohol on TV. For instance, Parks and Recreation. A little off topic, but I've been watching that show, and they on that show get drunk a lot. Like every once in a while, someone will get completely hammered, like totally overserved, out of control drunk, and it never reflects really on their character. But in that same show, the stoner animal control group is like totally unreliable and like idiot and like all these things, and it's like actually what the truth is that people that smoke cannabis are as broad a spectrum as absolutely any other subgroup in the world. If you look at like beer drinkers, anybody that consumes a beer, that doesn't, you don't immediately think of them as like a lazy idiot because they drink beer, or even if they get drunk, that like they're just drunk on alcohol and then the next day they might be hungover, but that doesn't impact who they are as a person. But when they show somebody smoking cannabis and they depict them in such a way that they have a moral failing or something like that, stupid or are incapable or incompetent, or are always all the time like completely incoherent, is just like such a negative depiction. And I think that like I was thinking the other day, like, what I would want to see as like a positive depiction of cannabis in 2021, and it would be like a working mom that casually takes a hit from her vape pen, and that's kind of the entire discussion of cannabis on the show. That's not even the point of the show at all. It's just something that this character does to relax, and you show them doing that because it humanizes them, and you know that they are, while they are like this central character that is going to, do some heroic shit, they can also like be somebody who uses cannabis to relax or to treat a condition or to just de-stress in general.
That feels like something Murphy Brown could have given us.
Yeah, that would have been perfect. Murphy Brown would have been perfect for it. No, but I don't know.
I mean, with this episode, like you're saying about all the racist stereotypes it plays into, I mean, so the sister takes one bite and immediately throws her school books away. Basically, just drops out of school after her very first hit.
Yeah.
They ignored the baby. Like, they're just sitting there, the baby's starving, and like they don't even care.
Yeah, that is like
they're just in a stupor surrounded by trash. It's
yes, that is like directly taken from like old urban legends about like somebody took acid and put the baby in the microwave or something like that.
Right. It's so shameless.
It is. And really, like, at the end, when they come out and kind of try to like make fun of the thing that they're making fun of at the end is when a character speaks directly to the camera and tries to give sincere advice to the viewer. But like, that's what they were doing in the whole show. Like, there wasn't, I mean, unless if you're meant to view the show as a total parody of drug episodes, then they did an amazing job because it's full of horse crap, just like all of them. And it can be enjoyed almost in the same way. Like, occasionally I watch, there was like a special when I was a kid where all the Saturday morning cartoon characters got together and did a cartoon that's anti-drug. And it was like a huge deal because it was like, the Chipmunks, Muppet Babies, Garfield, countless other characters all appearing on screen together. And before it, George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush come out and say something about drugs. And it's funny because it's so out of control stupid, but they were trying to be serious. Whereas this show is like the opposite of that, where like it is a parody, but they were trying to make people take it seriously, but also they were trying to play both sides of the fence. Yeah. They really were. They were trying to make
like, so much parody has that problem where in trying to make fun of something, it just completely reiterates the thing that it's making fun of. Yeah. And this episode does not do enough. I mean, the ending where they talk about the don't do drugs so that sitcoms stop making heavy-handed, preachy anti-drug episodes like this one, it does do enough to make up for the 20 minutes that come before them.
No. And it reeks of a show that maybe was trying to do that and got noted into it going the other direction.
It's surprising that they would still let them do that ending, given, I mean, this was a TGIF show. This aired on Fridays with all the other family-friendly sitcoms. I mean, obviously they tried to make this somewhat Simpsons-like in terms of being a little bit smarter and a little bit more subversive, but this is still basically a show for kids. So the fact that they would do the very special episode is absolutely not surprising. But then the fact that they would let them try to undo everything at the final moments with that little meta ending like that, that is kind of surprising given the time period.
And you know what? In all honesty, like it makes it less fun to watch than the actual.
Yeah.
I mean, in hindsight, you know, the Full House episode where like Kimmy gets drunk, or like the episode of Family Matters where Urkel gets drunk and falls off a building is way funnier, like 1,000 times funnier in hindsight,
Right.
because they were dead serious about it being a message for kids to not drink. It's like punch. Even though Urkel had the best time of his life before he fell off the building, he invented the Urkel dance while he was drunk.
Oh wow, man! I wasn't a big Family Matters guy, so I didn't know all that.
I wasn't like a huge Family Matters person. It was kind of like came about when I was just kind of growing out of that type of situation show. But then I ended up, you know, and I always kind of thought it was stupid when I was growing up, but it's funny to me, funnier now to me as an adult, because I can't believe it existed, really. It was so silly.
Right. So the Simpsons have been around forever. I'm sure they've done at this point probably multiple marijuana episodes. I can't think of any off the top of my head based on like the 10 years I watched of that show. But talking about shows that are maybe not critical, but do portray sort of the downside of drinking, I feel like The Simpsons did a pretty good job of making beer drinking culture and bar culture look pretty gross and not very attractive, you know?
Definitely. They do a lot
like
of
not just with Barney, but with like Moe's bar just being like so filthy and depressing and everything.
Yeah. And like there was an episode I remember where they made fun of like a St. Patrick's Day parade. That I was like, yeah. St. Patrick's Day parade, yeah, for sure. They did some. They've done some cannabis stuff on The Simpsons for sure. I know, like I definitely remember an episode where Fish is in it, and like Homer gets like high. But there was funny stuff back in the '90s when it first came out, where they would casually throw in references to cannabis. Like there's an episode where way early on where Mayor Quimby is like hears his name on the radio and makes some sort of comment, but he's watering cannabis plants in his closet, which is like a totally subtle, funny thing because he's supposed to be like a Kennedy party boy.
Right.
And so that's really funny, and like the whole idea of like how Otto, the bus driver, was always high, and like Milhouse would be like, "Hey, what's that smell? It smells like Otto's jacket." Like those are like funny gags. But I don't know what they have done, like in terms of like actual, messaging on cannabis.
Right. And you don't know what angle that show is going to take. Like sometimes they could be sort of progressive, and other times they just resort to like this episode, just like the easy stereotypes and cliches. So, but I feel like if any show from that era could have done a good cannabis episode, it probably would have been The Simpsons. Yeah.
I mean, definitely there are references. There's a bunch of ones from the '70s too, and like early '80s. Like What's Happening did a cannabis episode with the Doobie Brothers, and Facts of Life did one where Judy buys a bong and she thinks that it's a jelly bean holder. It's a bong. It's funny, all the different weed media, like the show Weeds, right? The woman sold weed illegally during a period of time when medical marijuana existed. like the whole show makes no sense at all.
Right.
Because like medical cannabis existed in California in 1996. I mean, like, yeah, there was a lot of black market activity still going on, but like, I don't know. So the thing that makes me, as a cannabis user and someone who's like invested in like reducing cannabis stigma, it's very rare, extremely rare, to see cannabis portrayed in media in a way that's not bad. Even in pro-cannabis media, you know, like any Cheech and Chong movie, for instance, is like all horrible cannabis stereotypes. You know, like I said before, Jeff Spicoli, you know, he became like that. Jeff Spicoli voice became like the stoner voice for a long time. You know, did they show Steve Jobs smoking cannabis in the Steve Jobs movie? Like, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, they probably left that out.
Yeah.
And it's all based on the century of racist propaganda, as you point out in your book, Cannabis.
Yeah, I know it's. So I'm even finding now, like, that as I'm trying to pitch my strip to different cannabis media, that, you know, there's a lot of cannabis media that's tied together with cannabis corporations, and cannabis corporations are actually invested in stigma because it helps them maintain corporate dominance over this dangerous plant that only they can deal with because it's so dangerous, like uranium. So I don't know how I would like to see a like a good cannabis story. Like, I don't know. Like I said, I would like to see it as like a marginal, casual thing.
Yeah, just a normal part of everyday life.
Hey, maybe a Superman comic, and he's a regular Superman comic, but like there's one or two panels where at the end of the day he takes the hit off the joint, like how Arnold Schwarzenegger hits the joint at the end of Pumping Iron.
Right.
Actually, maybe Pumping Iron is the best depiction of cannabis in media because it's about somebody who works really hard and finds personal success and just uses cannabis at the end to relax. And that's maybe like the truest depiction of a cannabis user in a film.
Right. You know, before we go, I guess just one final question. I mean, obviously with Legalization Nation, you're focusing on how unfair and how poor the rollout of legal cannabis has been. How do you like huge macro view compared to how the situation was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? How do you feel right now about the state of cannabis becoming legalized and normalized in society today?
So, yeah, we have moved mountains in the last 10 years, for sure. I just want to recognize the issues in cannabis that we can wipe away at this point. You know, once people are admitting that this is a harmless, beneficial, therapeutic plant and not a radioactive killer, you know, the more we can convince people of that, the better all of these laws are going to look. Because it's stigma that makes them bad or allows corporations to make the laws inequitable. And so that is coming down a lot. And trust me, when I look at the situation in Pennsylvania, and I feel really bad because that's where I live, and I feel bad about it. You know, when I read about the stuff going on, like in, I believe it's Mississippi, where they voted to legalize medical cannabis, and the state Supreme Court just knocked it down for no reason.
Yeah.
That's bad. That's worse. When I look at even like in England, when I go visit the UK, I'm like, this is pre-1996 America in terms of cannabis use. I mean, it's really they're really like behind the times there. But then when I go to visit Canada, talk to my friends from Canada, it makes me feel really good because that's where we're headed, and that's kind of like the future. And the things that are going on there are really very positive. The benefits, the way that the Canadian people are looking at cannabis is very mature. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of the same type of corruption going on there that goes on in the United States, but generally speaking, there's a lot of good stuff that has happened there, and we're seeing the stigma fall there far faster than we're seeing it here.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully we get some of that down here in America, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Wow. Okay. That's another episode. Thanks, Brian Box Brown, for coming on. Thanks to everybody at Henson Productions that made this show exist for a few years. And most importantly, thank you for listening. Greatly appreciate it. For real. No, I also can't believe that I've already done 2 episodes on dinosaurs before I've done anything about Star Wars or Marvel or, well, I guess we did that Spider-Man cartoon, but we haven't done anything from the MCU. We've only done a couple of the classic Disney animated features. That's one of the joys of this show. I have no idea what people are going to pick. It's entirely up to them, and I am honor-bound to watch whatever it is they ask me to watch. This one, I think you would agree, it led to a very fascinating discussion about a very pressing subject that has been plaguing our society for over a century. So again, thanks to Brian for coming on and talking about it. This has been What the Plus. I'm Garrett. We'll have another episode next week. Listen to it wherever you listen to this one. It'll be at the same place. Thanks again. Have a great week.